Hello and thank you for coming to check this out. So this is our 14th After Effects reproduction. The source graphic for this one comes from an After Effects project that's at the Envato Market. It's from the Typoland studio, and if you want to go and check it out, you'll see it rolling in at about 44 seconds. There's a link in the description. I actually did two versions for this reproduction, so what you're looking at here is the keyframed version, like I would usually do. But if I turn this group off and let's turn this group on, this version here is all done just by using Motion 5 behaviors. So what we will do is let's go through and do everything keyframing as normal, and then we can come back and see how we did it with behaviors instead. Also, just before we start, if you want a copy of the font that we're using, it's Unisans Heavy. If that is not in your font book already, there is a link in the description. You can go and get it. It's not the exact same font as the source graphic. I couldn't find a free version of that one, but Unisans Heavy is very, very close. Okay then, let's jump into a project and see how we put all of this together. Alright, so to start we have this dark color solid as a background in its own group. Here's the RGB details if you want to use the same color. So let's make a new group and we'll put that line element in here. I'm going to call this group the switch mask, and I'll come and grab the line tool, and holding shift I'm going to just draw in from top to bottom. Come into geometry and set the first Y at 190 and the second Y at minus 190. I'll just rename this as the switcher. Then come into properties, set the X position at minus 280 and the Y position at 130. And then come into the shape section, into style, set the width to 15 and set the start cap and end cap both to none. So now let's animate this line in with the playhead at the start. Set a keyframe on the last point offset and drop it to 0%. Bring the playhead forward to 25 frames. Bring the last point offset back up to 100, and let's work on the curve. So drag to select, right click, set it to Bezier, and let's break the tangents on the handles. And I'm going to grab this top handle and pull it over this way, and I'll pull this handle back a bit. Okay, so now let's bring the playhead to 5 frames. Set a keyframe on the first point offset, bring the playhead to 1 second, and bring the first point offset to 65%. Okay, I'll just turn off the last point offset and select this curve, set the interpolation to Bezier, do the breaking of the tangents. I'll drag this handle down and this handle across. This I found was tricky to do compared to the source graphic. What we want is a noticeable drop in the first point offset, like coming to land clearly after the last point offset has settled. Okay, even that's a bit soft compared to the source graphic, but I don't want to spend lots of time getting it right. Let's carry on, it's good enough to move forward. So then we are going to animate this line the first 3 passes, and then we'll do the titles. But first we've got to give this line element a shadow. So to do the shadows, we're going to use a blending trick that you might do in Adobe Illustrator with the blend tool, or it can be done in Affinity Designer too, just not as easily. We're going to use a replicator though instead. I learned how to do this by watching the Simon Ubsdells tutorial, and there's a link in the description to go and check that out. It's really useful. So we're going to grab the switcher, and I'm using L on my keyboard to make a replicator. Now I'll drop it under the switcher line and I'll turn the switcher back on. Come into the replicator properties and set the shape to line. Come down to color mode and change that to over pattern. Open up the gradient and get rid of this right stopper, and we'll set the left side stopper's color to black. Then come into replicator properties and line it up. Okay, so then in the canvas I'm just going to right click and choose replicator, and I'm going to drop the shapes and to kind of line up like this, and then we'll come in and increase the points to 200. Okay, we can do lots of things from here to make the shadow more convincing. We can add a directional blur, lots of things, but let's just keep it simple. We'll come to properties and drop the opacity down to 50%. And I'll just check that the shadow is going to follow the switcher around. Yep. Okay, so that's our shadow done, and let's rename this replicator as the switcher shadow. Okay, so now let's animate the switcher to pass left and right 3 times. Select the switcher, bring the playhead to 1 second and 3 frames. Come into properties, open up the position, set a keyframe for the X position. Come forward 1 second to 2 second, 3 frames. Move the X position to 260. Come forward to 3 seconds, 3 frames. Set the X position back to -280, and then come forward to 4 seconds, 3 frames. Set the X position back to 260. Okay, so let's work with these curves. Come through and just do the break tangent wherever you can. Right, so I'm going to drag this handle down and this handle over this way, and this handle to about here, this handle over this way, this handle to about here, this handle down. These are very close to the curves that feature in the source graphic, just going by the timing of the switcher line. Let's see how this runs. Okay, that's pretty good. So I'm going to bring the playhead now to 1 second, 10 frames. And it's time to add our titles. Let's add a new group for the titles. and I'll grab the text tool and I'll click into the canvas on this side of the switcher and add switch as the first title text, and I'll just rename it as first title in the layers panel. I'll grab the switch mask group and close it for now, and command right bracket to move it above the titles group. Okay, so I'll grab that first title now and increase the font size to 95 and center the alignment. Come into properties and just by eye drop the y-axis down so that it sits in the middle of that switcher line. Okay, let's grab the switcher from the switch mask group, and I'm going to change its color to this blue. This is sampled from the source graphic, so here's the RGB if you want to use the same color. Alright, so now we're going to give this title text its own shadow, so I'll select it and I'm using L to make a replicator, same as before. I'll drop the replicator under the source and turn that source back on. Then I'll select the replicator and come into the inspector and change the shape to a line. Come down and set the color mode to over pattern. Open up the gradient and get rid of this right side tab. Set the left tab to black. Then come into properties. Just move it over to line up. I'll right click on it in the canvas and select Replicator, and any way you like, just like we did before, drag out the duplicates to form a shadow base, and then come into the Replicator in the inspector, increase the points so that they blend together. Let's go for 320, and then come into properties and drop the opacity down to 50%. Okay. Next is to keyframe the movement of the title, so select that first title text, move the X position so that it's sitting on the other side of the switcher. It's at according to the source graphic, it appears at about 1 second 10 frames, so we'll do the same. Okay, grab that replicator. I'm just going to rename this as the first title shadow, and let's just drag the x-axis to line it up again. When we keyframe, it should follow. Okay, so grab that first title and let's set a keyframe on the X position, then move the playhead to 2 seconds and set the X value to 0. Alright, and let's grab this curve, break the tangents, give it a curve like this so that the title's Russian but not too hard. Okay, and alright, that will do, and then we want to bring the playhead to 2 seconds and 20 frames and pull the titles back the other way, back the same way they came from a little bit. And then this is going to be fussy. Grab this handle, break the tangent. Okay, and going to grab this handle, pull it flat there, and pull this one flat. Something like this. We want this title's motion back to be very subtle. That's not too bad. Just so that it seems like it's falling back into the switcher as it gets masked out. Okay, and then bring the playhead to 3 seconds. And now we'll carry on with the other titles. Before we do the second titles, though, we have to add in our mask. So grab the switch mask group, select the rectangle tool, and on this side of the switching line, drag in a rectangle. I'm going to select it and right click and choose anchor point. Drag the anchor point to the right hand side. I'll rename it as the mask source. In the inspector, set the Y position to 0. For the X position, open up the menu, choose add parameter behavior, a link. Drag in the switcher as the source. Then just come down here to X offset and move it back so it's the right hand edge is sitting around the middle of the switcher line. Okay, so now come and grab the first title, right click, add image mask, use our rectangle shape as the source. Okay, bring the playhead so that it's covering about half of our first title text. With that image mask selected, hold Option and drag a copy to the first title shadow. Okay, we can close that up and close that up. Right, so now we're ready to start with the second title. For our second titles, we'll duplicate the first title, so select it in the group, Command D to duplicate. Let's rename it straight away as second title. Come into the inspector to appearance, change the color to the blue that we used before. Come to format, drop the font size to 85. Come down to the text bay and we'll change the word. Then grab the image mask for the second title, change the blend mode from add to subtract. Right, so now our mask is switching out one title for the other. It's revealing this one and masking out this one at the same time. Alright then, let's bring the playhead to 2 seconds and 10 frames. So grab the second title, come to the inspector to properties and reset the X position. Now we're all probably got slightly different curves, so what you want to do is just drag your text to the other side of the switcher around here, not too far past. I'm going to go for -70. And then bring your playhead to, set a keyframe there wherever you set it. Don't forget to set a keyframe. And then bring the playhead to 3 seconds. And I'm going to set my position here at -15. You can do that too. So our position on this side, wherever it came from, might vary with our curves, but it should come to settle at X -15. Okay, so let's change our note. Before we work on the curve, let's bring the playhead to 3 seconds 20 frames and drag the second title back a bit the way that it came. Not too far. Okay, and then let's come and work on these curves. So I'm going to drag to select them all, break tangents wherever possible. Okay, so we want to give this side a curve like this, so they rush in a bit. And on this side, we want it to pull back where it came from very slowly. Alright then, so now we don't want to see the second title before we see the first title, so let's bring our playhead to 2 seconds. Select the second title, hit I on your keyboard to trim it. Then bring your playhead to 4 seconds. Hit O on your keyboard to trim it out. Bring the playhead to 3 seconds. And select the first title and shift select the first title shadow and hit O on your keyboard to trim them out there. I'll just select that second title again, and now we can start giving the second title its shadow. For the second title's shadow, we're going to duplicate the first title shadow and just adjust a couple of things. So select that first title, Command D to duplicate. Let's rename it straight away as second title shadow. I'm going to Command right bracket to move it up to sit under the second title. See how we trimmed it in the timeline? The first thing we have to do is move it to sit in time with the second title. So bring your playhead to 2 seconds and make sure you have the second title shadow still selected. Shift left bracket to move the endpoint forward. Okay, then we can move our playhead to 4 seconds and hit O on the keyboard to trim it out. Okay, so let's grab that second title shadow, open it up, select the mask copy and delete that, select the replicator, see down here the source, we just want to drag our second title word in instead. Alright then, come in to make sure you have this replicator selected for the second title shadow. Come into properties and use the X position to drag it in line. Okay, good. And then select the second title, select the second title's image mask and option drag a copy to the second title shadow. Okay then, I'll leave my playhead at 2 seconds. Let's now add the third titles. For the third titles, we'll just duplicate the first title again. So grab that first title, Command D to duplicate. Let's rename it straight away as third title. Then I'm going to Command right bracket to move it to the top of the group. And we need to make some changes. So in the timeline here, you can see it's still sitting back here where the first titles come in. Bring the playhead to 1 second and 10 frames, and hit I on the keyboard to trim the start of the third title to where the X position keyframing starts. Then bring the playhead to 3 seconds and 10 frames and use Shift left bracket to bring everything forward. So the third title animates the same as the first title, so there's not that much to do here. But what we want to do now is give the third title its own shadow. But let's change it to our third word first. So come into the inspector to text format. Let's change it to say titles. Okay, now we can give it its shadow. So select the first title shadow. Command D to duplicate. Rename it straight away as third title shadow, and I'll command right bracket to move it up in the group, and then I'll just open it up and delete that image mask, and I'll select it. In the inspector I'm just going to drag in our third title word as the new source. Right, you can see that the third title shadow is sitting down here in the timeline, so make sure it's selected, bring the playhead to 3 seconds 10 frames, and Shift left bracket to move it all forward to 3 seconds 10 frames. And then grab the third title image mask and option drag a copy to the third title as shadow. So how is it all looking? Okay, we are all set now to animate everything out, but before we do that, just bring the playhead to 6. We're at the end of the timeline here, it's about 6 seconds, so I'm just going to trim the third title out point to extend it a bit, and I'll do the same with the shadow. Might not need that step, but we're just being careful here. Okay, now we are ready to animate everything out. So we want to bring our playhead to 4 seconds and 3 frames. Grab the switcher. I'll just close up the titles group. We're done with them now. Grab the switcher, come into properties. Okay, come to 5 seconds and 3 frames. Set that X position value to -280. So now our switcher has moved back. It's masked out our last title text, and we can adjust this curve. Something like this. Just going to double check how that looks with masking out titles. Alright, that's good. I wanted to catch the titles as it's just starting to fall back. So now we want to animate the first point, last point offsets again to have this animate out, disappearing up this way. So bring the playhead to 4 seconds 25 frames. Select shape, make sure you have the switcher selected, select shape, come to the first point offset, set another keyframe here, bring the playhead to 5 seconds 13 frames, and bring that first point offset value back to 0. Then bring the playhead to 5 seconds, set a keyframe on the last point offset, bring the playhead to 5 seconds and 18 frames, and bring its value back down to 0. Okay, I'll just turn off the X position and the last point offset. I'll grab this first point offset curve, set the interpolation to Bezier and break the tangents. How is it looking? Alright, so now we want to adjust the last point offset. Interpolation to Bezier, do the breaking of the tangents. How does that look just without anything else? That actually looks quite good just on its own, but let's tweak it a little bit more. Alright, let's play everything back. Okay, so we're done with the main graphic. Let's add that backdrop, the snow flurry. So I'm going to add a new group. I'll call it the snow, and I'm going to bring the playhead just back to the start. I'll come to the library, come into particle emitters, want to choose nature and find snow flurry. Select that and apply. Right, then come into the inspector and we will make some changes. First we want to, let me just check my notes here. Okay, we want to turn off 3D and going to adjust the angle so that it heads up to the top right hand corner. Then in the canvas I'm going to right click and choose Emitter and drag to expand the boundaries of the rectangle that it's based in. Then come into the inspector and change it from tile fill to random fill. Okay, just a couple more steps. We want to bring the snow group under the titles. Looks quite nice with them over the top actually. But let's bring them under, just in keeping with the source graphic that we're reproducing. And we'll come into the emitter, come down here and choose show on the master controls. You can do anything from here to make it more to your liking, but just in keeping with the source graphic, we're going to drop the speed to, that speed looks alright as it is. Alright, let's slow it down a bit. Let's drop the speed to, let's say 35. And come into properties and drop the overall opacity to 60%. So there we are, that is our 14th After Effects reproduction in Motion 5. So as I said before, we can now have a look at doing this reproduction entirely using motion behaviors. So I'll reset and I'll see you back here. Right, so here is the one that we did just using Motion 5 behaviors. So let's have a look at the switcher first. The animation in is done by using a write-on. and I've put a ramp on the first point offset to bring it down to 65%. And compared to keyframing, I think it looks pretty good. To get the switcher to animate with the passes, you can see the curve here, which is looking like something that we would use keyframing for. Each pass is two behaviors connected together, just using the standard move behaviors. I haven't gone with the logarithmic or exponential parameter behaviors. I wanted to see what we could do with the just plain move behaviors, and it worked out not too bad. So you can see the first move this way is this behavior here that's set to accelerate, and the second half of the pass is another motion behavior, just the move behavior, set to decelerate. So we get something close to a curve that we would want to use keyframing for, or combine the logarithmic and exponential parameter behaviors for. It's a little bit choppy, not quite as smooth, but running at 30 frames a second it looks alright, I think. You can see that these ones here are much smoother. I've sort of come to realize that if they are of equal length, then it smooths out much more. So if I change this one here, it's sitting on 10 frames now. If I bring that to forward, you can see the closer they are in duration, the smoother the curve you get from combining them. So that's something to think about. Nice smooth curves all the way through. To animate out, I have just used ramps on the, you can see them here, the last two behaviors. These are just ramp parameter behaviors controlling the last point offset and first point offset, to give us as close as possible to the source graphics animation. And the titles are animating in and pulling back just with regular move behaviors. If we jump into the titles, you can see one to move in, one to move out. Here's the move in, it's set to decelerate, and the move out is an ease in that's stretched out to be much longer than it needs to be, so that we get this very gradual animation back. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put a copy of this project file up for download if you want to open it up and see how the motion behaviors did everything instead of keyframing. That's it for the 14th After Effects reproduction. I hope that was useful, and thanks for watching.